Okay, so hopefully you watched the video before this. So we have another two equations. So I'm going to go ahead and number them, and in different colors so you know which one I'm graphing. And we're going to follow those same steps again. So if you remember from the previous problem, the first step that we need to do is get y by itself, because we want to graph these equations eventually. So looking at the first equation here, we have y. Let me get my pointer out here. Y is greater than or less than greater than or equal to -3, right? And notice that y is already by itself, so I can go ahead and graph this. But how do I graph an equation where y is just equal to some sort of number, right? So let's think about this here. So in this case, looking at this graph, oops, let me erase that. Looking at this graph here, we have to figure out what our slope and what our intercept is. And it's kind of hard to tell, right? Because when we have the intercept form, mx plus b, the slope-intercept form, we can see that our equation doesn't have an x, right? So if our equation doesn't have an x, then that means our slope must have been 0. Because let's think about it. If this m here was 0, isn't 0 times x 0? And then you're just left with b, right? That would cancel out, and you're just left with the intercept. So if that case, then that means that this -3 is our intercept. And when we look at this here, if our slope is 0, well, okay, before we get there, how about we go ahead and plot our intercept. So our intercept is going to be on our y-axis at -3, so we plot that. But because our slope is 0, that means that we have a flat line. In other words, we have a horizontal line. So we're drawing a horizontal line, but do I use a dash or do I use a solid line? Well, let's take a look at this inequality here. Notice that it has a line underneath, so I have to use a solid line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a solid line, or solid horizontal line at -2. So you can see here that my slope here is 0 because it's a flat line. So we have a horizontal line. So looking at this here, I've drawn my line, but the next step is the shading, right? So looking at the inequality here, y is greater than and equal to -3. So if y is bigger, if y is greater, that means you need a shade above this line, right? Because numbers that are greater than -3 are like 1, 2, and 3, and those show up in this region, right? Numbers that are smaller than -3 are like -4, -5, -6, so I would shade below it. But in this case, we are greater than, so we shade above. So now that I've done all the shading, let me get rid of some of this excess here, my bad. I should not be over shading. So the next part is to look at our second equation, because we still need to graph that one. So looking at our second equation here, we need to get y by itself. Notice that y is not necessarily by itself yet. We still have this -1 in the way. So if I want to remove this term, I need to add 1 to both sides. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we add 1 to both sides, the y drops down, the 1's cancel, the inequality drops down. X plus 1, those are not like terms, so we just bring them down as x plus 1. And then now that y is by itself, we're going to go ahead and graph this. But before we do that, let's make sure we know our slope and our intercept. So it looks like our slope is 1/1, right? Because in front of this x here, by default, if there's not a number out here, it's always 1. And then I can always put 1/1. And then our intercept looks like it's also 1. Right, because there's our intercept here and it's a 1, so I'm going to drop that down. And now I'm going to plot this graph here. So in pink, I plot my intercept first, which on the y-axis at 1. And then my slope is 1 over 1, so up 1 over 1. And so looking at this here, what type of line do I draw? So looking at this inequality, it looks like I don't have a line underneath. So this is a dashed line. Now for the shading part here. So looking at the inequality, y is less than this line. So if y is less than, that means I need a shade below this pink line. Because if y is less than, you want y values that are going to be less than the line. So in this case, it's going to be this region underneath the line. So when y is less than the equation, so if y is less than, you shade below the line. And now what we need to do is find the region that the two colors intersect, where you see the two colors meet. So in this case, it looks like it's this region right here. So our intersection is right here for the two lines. And that's it.